It's so important that we're all sitting here and talking about it, because the majority of people actually don't want to know. It's been a taboo subject for so long, people haven't talked about it.
Welcome back to Retrover, where we break down legacy, power, and the stories they don't want you to miss. So make sure you hit subscribe and join the movement. On the freezing night of January 30th, 2026, Buckingham Palace shook the royal world with a shocking announcement. After decades of tight-lipped silence about hidden royal properties, the palace finally broke its silence, and what they revealed left Britain completely stunned. Lady Louise Windsor, the low-key 22-year-old granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, had officially inherited a secret Scottish estate almost no one even knew existed. Insiders whispered about it for years, calling it the Grey House. But to the public, it was like a ghost story. Something rumoured, never confirmed. This estate was so locked down, so restricted, that even senior royals had never stepped foot past its gates. But just weeks before the bombshell dropped, Queen Camilla and members of the Parker Bowles family were reportedly making quiet moves. Behind the scenes, trying to secure the property for themselves. Surveyors were consulted, legal teams were brought in, and strategies were mapped out. Still, the plan fell apart. In the end, they walked away empty-handed, and the quietest royal in the spotlight became the guardian of Queen Elizabeth's most closely protected retreat. So what is the Grey House really? For more than 70 years, it stayed completely off the radar. No official photos, no public listings, no mention in royal registries. Palace insiders referred to it only by a coded name, Site F. Even many royals had no clue it existed. Tucked away on 200 acres of rugged highland land near the Cairngorms, the estate sits in a windswept, isolated stretch designed to stay out of sight and out of reach. This was not just another royal residence. It was known privately as the Queen's Sanctuary. The property was purchased in 1952, just months after Elizabeth became Queen. The deed carried no royal title, only the name of a holding company connected to the Queen Mother's estate. The message was clear. This place was meant to stay hidden. Former palace staff later shared that the Queen would quietly retreat there for days at a time, reviewing state papers alone, far from cameras, press and royal formalities. At the Grey House, she wasn't Elizabeth the Queen. She was just Elizabeth, the woman. Prince Philip reportedly disliked the place, calling it too cold. Princess Anne hunted nearby but rarely stayed overnight. Princess Margaret visited once and never came back. And King Charles? Not once in his life did he set foot there. That detail raised eyebrows later. When Queen Camilla attempted to secure the estate, Charles had no personal tie to defend, because he had never truly known it existed. But the real weight of the Grey House wasn't the land, it was what was locked inside. Behind its quiet walls sat private archives, letters, photo negatives, audio recordings, materials never formally catalogued by royal archivists. Among them were the Queen's personal diaries, along with correspondence exchanged with global figures like Eisenhower, Nelson Mandela, and the Shah of Iran. And perhaps most touching of all, recorded messages intended for her grandchildren, meant to be played at key milestones in their lives. That wasn't just history, that was legacy sealed in time. One former palace librarian once described the private collection this way: "There's no scandal in there, just unfiltered memory." And that's exactly what gave it weight. Under long-standing royal archival practices, a reigning monarch can separate deeply personal materials through private legal arrangements, keeping them outside standard institutional access. Not Parliament, not the Crown's central archive, not even automatic succession. These items pass strictly to the heir chosen by the monarch. And in this case, that heir is Lady Louise Windsor. So when Buckingham Palace confirmed her inheritance, it wasn't just about land or buildings. It was about gaining access to Queen Elizabeth's private reflections, her handwritten thoughts, and her most personal recordings. At just 22, Louise became the sole custodian of a deeply private royal collection, holding pieces of history that no museum, institution, or future monarch can simply take back.
I did fight back, and I got off. I remember getting off the train and my mother looking at me and saying, "You know, why is your hair standing on end? And why is the button, emitting from your coat?" And
oh God, it was physical.
I'd been attacked, but I remember anger and.
So how did one of the quietest royals end up with such a massive responsibility? The answer goes back to a bond that barely anyone paid attention to. Between 2019 and 2021, Lady Louise spent long stretches of summer at Balmoral, even staying behind after other family members had left. She wasn't there for headlines or photo ops. She walked through the hills with her grandmother, sat beside her in the library, and helped sort through personal papers that were never intended for the official archives. As one lady-in-waiting once shared, she didn't perform, she just was present. That steady, genuine energy stood out. The Queen reportedly saw in Louise a reflection of Princess Margaret, sharp-minded, deeply interested in history and quietly strong, but without the turbulence that once followed Margaret. While others chased attention, Louise brought calm loyalty. That difference mattered more than anyone realised. By October 2021, only months after Prince Philip's funeral, Queen Elizabeth made a private but historic legal decision. She created a conditional personal legacy deed that placed the Grey House beyond the reach of the Crown estate. The document reportedly included strict terms. The estate would transfer only after specific trustees had passed. It would remain outside Crown or parliamentary review. And in a move that stunned insiders, Queen Camilla and her direct descendants were formally restricted from access. Palace staff quietly referred to the provision as C Clause 31, a subtle reference to the 31st day of Elizabeth's reign when she first visited the Grey House. Alone. At the time, only 4 people even knew the estate existed. Her solicitor, Princess Anne, her trusted archivist, and Prince Edward were all aware of the arrangement, and every one of them stayed completely silent. Not a whisper slipped out. Camilla reportedly had no knowledge that such a clause even existed, but by 2024, questions started surfacing behind closed doors, and that curiosity triggered a chain reaction that would quietly shake the monarchy. Camilla never directly mentioned the Grey House. She was far too strategic for that. Instead, she raised careful questions about whether any royal properties had been excluded from duchy estate disclosures. It seemed procedural on the surface, almost routine, but the timing raised eyebrows. By that point, her formal influence within royal structures was no longer growing. She understood she would never command the same institutional authority Queen Elizabeth once held. If she wanted lasting impact, it had to be rooted in something solid. Property, symbolism, legacy. By January 2026, the situation escalated. During a private discussion at Birkhall, King Charles's Scottish residence, Camilla proposed that the Grey House be placed under joint royal stewardship. Her suggestion? Let it be managed collectively by the Crown and aligned charitable foundations. On paper, it sounded impressive, restoring Highland architecture, hosting writers' retreats, supporting conservation efforts, even promoting curated heritage tourism. It was packaged as a vision and service. But insiders weren't convinced. To some within palace circles, this wasn't about charity, it was about control. Gaining stewardship of the Grey House would mean proximity to Balmoral, indirect access to sensitive historical materials, and perhaps most symbolically, linking the Parker Bowles name to one of Queen Elizabeth's most private sanctuaries. As one courtier reportedly put it, she wasn't asking for a cottage. The message behind the proposal felt much bigger than it appeared. She wasn't asking for a simple property, she was asking for location and long-term leverage. Even before the formal proposal reached the table, surveyors had reportedly been sent to the Highlands under the label of environmental consultants. Draft budgets were prepared, preliminary plans were sketched out. This wasn't a casual idea tossed into conversation. It looked organised, structured, and ready to move. King Charles, however, didn't shut it down in dramatic fashion. He handled it in a very controlled way. He delayed. Meetings were postponed. Legal experts were quietly consulted. The Royal Estates Council was instructed to examine ownership records that hadn't been reviewed since the 1950s. Then on January 12th, during a private session with his secretary and 2 constitutional advisors, a final position was delivered. The message was simple: the estate was not available for reassignment, now or at any point in the Kipyawasen future. The tone was calm, polite, firm. He didn't reference his mother's private deed. He didn't mention Lady Louise by name. Instead, he referred only to a pre-existing private settlement that stood outside Crown Review. That phrasing carried weight. Observers say Camilla maintained composure when leaving the meeting, but it was clear the decision wasn't shifting. Just 3 days later, Buckingham Palace made the announcement public. The Grey House had been left entirely to Lady Louise Windsor, not to Prince Edward, not placed in a shared trust, not under joint stewardship. The Queen's private will, finalised in October 2021, named Louise as the sole and unrestricted owner, covering the land, the archives, staff agreements, and even the authority to limit public access. One line in the will made it unmistakable. The decision was personal and permanent. The will stated clearly, "This house is to remain a refuge, not a monument." That line said everything. It reflected Queen Elizabeth's careful strategic mindset, protective of what mattered to her and firm in her decisions. The message was unmistakable, and it carried no room for reinterpretation.
It was anger, and I thought, why is this? Well, it was sort of boy. I thought it was an old man, was probably not a great deal older than me, but and I think...
And attacked in what way?
On a train.
You were on a train?
On a train.
And someone you didn't know?
Somebody I didn't know. I was reading my book, and, this man attacked me, and I...
When the news became public, the reaction was intense. Reports suggested that Tom Parker Bowles had been exploring culinary projects connected to the Highlands near the estate. Those ideas quickly lost momentum once the terms of the will were confirmed. The late Queen's instructions were final, and the Grey House was no longer open to discussion. What many thought was negotiable suddenly became completely untouchable. Inside royal circles, the mood reportedly shifted fast. Surprise turned into disbelief, and then frustration. As one family associate allegedly put it, the Queen drew a final line. Legal teams examined the language of the will, but the structure was solid. The settlement stood on private legal ground, carefully prepared years earlier. At the centre of the storm stood Queen Camilla, facing the reality that this particular legacy was never within reach. But here's where the story takes another turn. Lady Louise Windsor had not stepped into this role blindly. Long before the public announcement, she had been quietly preparing. Since mid-2025, she had reportedly made low-profile visits to the Grey House. Residents near Glenmore Village noticed a young woman dressed simply, arriving without ceremony, accompanied by a single female protection officer. She stayed for several days at a time, politely telling locals she was studying Highland geography. Behind the scenes, though, she was learning the responsibilities tied to the estate. Guided by 2 retired archivists and a royal legal advisor, she practiced cataloguing documents, understanding estate management, and reviewing the legal framework protecting private succession rights. This wasn't treated as a luxury, it was framed as responsibility. As one archivist reportedly said, it was a duty. From the very beginning, she approached it with focus and discipline. When the inheritance officially took effect, there were no grand ceremonies, no dramatic public appearance, just a quiet update filed with the UK Land Registry. Clean, simple, final. Then on January 25th, Buckingham Palace issued a short statement confirming what had already been set in motion. The strategy was subtle but powerful. The Grey House remained private, yet its meaning grew even stronger within royal circles. Lady Louise was no longer viewed as simply the reserved granddaughter. She had become the official guardian of a deeply personal royal archive, protector of materials that even a reigning monarch could not access without her approval. In that specific and highly sensitive area of legacy, her authority was clear and independent. The symbolism alone shifted internal dynamics in a big way. She did not handle it alone, though. Several senior figures ensured the transition unfolded smoothly. Princess Anne played a central role, overseeing the execution of the transfer and maintaining structured oversight of estate arrangements through established royal channels. According to palace sources, she personally handed Louise a sealed key during a private stay in Scotland, and when questions were reportedly raised through internal financial offices, Anne responded firmly, reminding those involved, "You do not challenge the last wish of the sovereign." That statement ended the discussion immediately. With that, the matter was settled. The late Queen's instructions stood exactly as written, and Louise's stewardship became fully recognised. Within palace walls, the message was clear. This final decision was not simply about land or buildings, it reflected trust. It signalled confidence in someone who would protect sensitive history quietly and responsibly. Without seeking attention, Lady Louise stepped into a role that carries weight far beyond headlines. You honour it. That was Princess Anne's only instruction to Duchess Sophie, Lady Louise's mother, and the message was crystal clear. There was no long debate, no dramatic strategy session, just a direct reminder to respect the late Queen's wishes. Sophie followed that guidance with quiet precision. Instead of confronting Queen Camilla publicly, she worked carefully behind the scenes. Reports suggest she ensured Louise's financial matters were protected from unnecessary internal audits, tightened security around details of the estate's location, and arranged for discreet security briefings regarding potential monitoring around the property. There were also concerns about unauthorized surveillance attempts in late 2025. Security teams connected to royal offices reportedly detected efforts to drone scan sections of the Grey House roofline and place trail cameras near the surrounding woodland. None of those attempts were successful. Protective measures were already in place, and the estate's privacy remained intact. The situation highlighted just how sensitive the property had become. Then came another key moment. In November 2025, shortly before the inheritance became public, Queen Camilla reportedly reached out to Prince Edward, asking whether the announcement could be delayed in the interest of family unity. His response was described as firm and direct. "My daughter will not be a placeholder for your ambitions. You had your turn." That statement made his position unmistakable. The process moved forward without delay. The deed was formally recorded. The will remained sealed. For the first time since Queen Elizabeth's passing, the matter was beyond debate. And then came a quiet scene that caught public attention. On a calm January afternoon, Lady Louise Windsor walked alone into Greyfriars Church, a historic chapel near the estate. There was no visible entourage, no dramatic display, just Louise entering quietly. But one detail stood out. On her lapel was a brooch never seen before. It featured a silver thistle intertwined with Tudor roses, centered with a small diamond heart hidden underneath. Engraved on the back were 4 words: "For service, not spectacle." The design was linked to Queen Elizabeth II's private motto, previously used only in personal letters to Princess Anne, Prince Philip, and Lady Sarah Chatto. The message was subtle, but powerful. It wasn't just jewellery, it was a statement. Louise wasn't stepping away from royal responsibility, she was stepping directly into it. After placing flowers gently on the altar, she turned to address a small gathering that had assembled for what was described as a charity appearance. What happened next quickly became one of the most widely shared royal clips of January 2026. She said clearly, "The house I inherited is not a trophy. I do not claim it because of my name, but because of what I've learnt from those who came before me. Quiet loyalty, private strength, and faith that protects, not performs. I will not allow its memory to be rewritten for convenience." The room fell silent. When she finished speaking, she didn't turn toward the cameras. Instead, she bowed her head toward a stone plaque engraved with Queen Elizabeth's words. "It is not the crown that grants duty, it is duty that gives meaning to the crown." That moment carried weight far beyond the chapel walls. Within hours, Princess Anne released a rare public statement. Lady Louise speaks not as a future monarch, but as a guardian of what can be inherited, moral authority. The reaction was immediate. King Charles cleared his schedule for 2 days and held private discussions with Prince Edward at Balmoral. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla was photographed entering Clarence House alone, looking serious as headlines spread across every front page. One palace insider reportedly remarked that the family hadn't simply closed ranks, they had closed around Louise. Media outlets erupted with dramatic headlines about a new era and unexpected leadership from the younger generation. And just when it seemed the moment had peaked, Princess Catherine posted a subtle but powerful message on Instagram, adding even more attention to an already historic week. Princess Catherine's post was simple but powerful. She shared a handwritten note that read, "Legacy is not what we receive, it's what we choose to preserve." Alongside it were 2 hashtags, #GRHouse and #WindsorDuty. Within 20 minutes, the post surged past 2 million likes. The message spread fast, and the symbolism was impossible to ignore. Inside St. James's Palace, senior officials reportedly gathered for a rapid strategy discussion. Louise's rising influence was forming a powerful side narrative, one that sat outside Queen Camilla's reach, and in some ways, even overshadowed Prince William's formal position. But William wasn't said to be concerned. According to insiders, he told Catherine, She's doing what we were raised to do. That quiet support spoke volumes. In that moment, Lady Louise wasn't just a private figure anymore. She was being viewed as a steady moral voice within modern royal life. Still, the situation didn't stay calm for long. Within days, Queen Camilla unveiled a new initiative titled The Crown's Compassion, a life in modern royal service.
Feel very strongly about and, want to do.
Because people bury things, like I suppose that's what
You
you're saying,
bury
sort of
things
move
like
on,
that.
and but it's part of society and it's part of the world we move in, and also we don't share. So thank you for saying that, especially in this context.
Thank you.
And they must be from above, smiling down on you and thinking, my goodness me, what a...
The timing raised eyebrows. The announcement came just 30 minutes after confirmation of Louise and Princess Anne's joint archival project, The Quiet Years. The venue choice also stood out. Camilla selected St George's Hall, one of Queen Elizabeth II's most historically significant spaces, to deliver her remarks. The symbolism was strong and carefully chosen. The public must remember that loyalty isn't silence, she reportedly told aides. I have served with or without approval. The statement was firm, but reactions were mixed. Princess Anne responded to press questions with a composed smile, offering no direct comment. Observers noted the contrast in tone. And then came the biggest surprise of all. King Charles made a move that shifted the entire atmosphere once again. Instead of standing beside his wife at the official launch, King Charles postponed his appearance, citing a routine health review. Only a handful of minor royals attended. To palace watchers, the optics were impossible to miss. It looked like a quiet downgrade happening in real time. When the exhibition opened, public reaction was muted. Critics described it as overly polished and self-focused, featuring large photographs of Camilla alongside the king, paired with captions highlighting her modern service. One royal biographer wrote, "It's less a tribute to duty and more a scrapbook of a contested reign." That line spread quickly. Online, the backlash picked up speed, and within hours, #GreyHouseOverGlamour began trending across platforms. Then Princess Catherine added fuel to the moment with a carefully timed Instagram story. The image showed Louise, Princess Anne, and archival staff reviewing historical documents. The caption read, "Work, not display. Duty, not decoration." The post generated over 3 million interactions in a single day. The contrast between the two public images could not have been clearer. A few days later, tensions reportedly reached a boiling point. On January 26th, Queen Camilla and Princess Anne crossed paths in the Long Gallery at Windsor Castle. Witnesses described the encounter as tense and emotionally charged. Camilla allegedly accused Anne of elevating Louise in a way that undercut her own public initiatives. Anne's response, according to those present, was calm but firm. "If the spotlight finds her, Camilla, it's because the public sees what you're trying to hide." When Camilla countered that Louise had never been intended to serve as a working royal, Anne replied, "Neither were you, and yet, here we are." The room reportedly fell into complete silence after that exchange. The message had landed, and everyone felt it. Camilla reportedly walked out of the gallery that day and did not return. Within days, her exhibition was quietly closed, officially attributed to space reallocation. There was no extended statement, no public explanation. It simply disappeared from the schedule. The silence was noticeable. Then came a dramatic shift. The royal website unveiled a new banner across its homepage. The Quiet Years, a reflection on unseen service, opening spring 2026. The exhibit would be curated by Lady Louise Windsor and HRH Princess Anne. Beneath the announcement sat a quote from Queen Elizabeth II. "What is remembered with dignity endures longer than what is displayed for applause." The message felt deliberate. The institution itself appeared to be embracing a different tone, one centered on restraint, memory, and steady service. By February 2026, headlines across the country began describing Louise as the spiritual successor to her grandmother's values. Commentators called her the quiet heartbeat of the modern monarchy. The idea gaining traction was simple. Influence does not always need volume. Sometimes it grows through consistency and calm resolve. Universities quickly took notice. Invitations reportedly arrived from Oxford, Cambridge, and even Harvard, requesting that Louise speak about leadership, legacy, and public responsibility. Then on February 5th, a BBC poll added another layer of momentum. According to the survey, 71% of respondents believed Louise would merit a formal royal title, if she assumed expanded public duties in Scotland. Support reportedly climbed to 84% among Scottish respondents. Just 2 days later, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles III had formally offered her elevation to HROH Princess Louise, tied to responsibilities in youth education, cultural heritage, and leadership development. However, the proposal came with clear expectations. She would need to divide her time between Scotland and London, undergo updated security protocols, accept increased official protection, and step back from certain private professional interests, including her equestrian coaching. Inside palace walls, reaction was divided. Some viewed it as a natural progression. Others understood that accepting such a role would permanently reshape her independent path. The decision now rested entirely with Louise, and the country was watching closely. Princess Anne offered her support, but with a note of caution. According to sources, she made her position clear. She can serve, but she must not lose herself. Duchess Sophie was said to be visibly emotional during private discussions. "It's not the title that worries me, it's the weight that comes with it," she reportedly shared. The opportunity was historic, but the pressure attached to it was undeniable. Then on February 8th, a new voice entered the conversation. Meghan Markle appeared on a US talk show and made a pointed comment. "When people are elevated based on silence rather than service, we must ask what values are being rewarded." She did not mention Louise directly. Still, the timing fueled online debate. Social media platforms lit up and hashtags like #SilencePrincess began trending globally. Commentary accounts and anonymous profiles pushed claims that Louise's rise symbolised a shift away from outspoken royal figures. The following day, Princess Anne and Prince Edward responded with a rare joint statement. Lady Louise Windsor has neither asked for a throne nor a stage. She has only ever accepted responsibility when others discarded it. The message was brief, but firm. Public reaction in the UK leaned heavily in Louise's favour, with many commentators describing the criticism as unnecessary and poorly timed. Then on February 10th, standing in light Highland snowfall outside the Grey House, Louise made her own move. In a live broadcast watched by more than 9 million viewers, she announced the creation of the Grey House Trust. "This will not only preserve archives," she said, "but become a living trust for duty, to uplift those who serve quietly, protect heritage, and prepare young people for ethical leadership." When asked directly whether she would accept the proposed royal title, she paused before answering, "I am grateful for my family's trust, but I believe duty does not require a title." The response landed with clarity and confidence. The moment her words aired, the atmosphere shifted again. Louise had just turned down the spotlight without rejecting responsibility, and that balance stunned commentators. By the next morning, front pages carried variations of the same headline: "Duty without demand." Analysts on morning panels debated whether the monarchy had just witnessed a generational reset unfolding in real time. Inside Buckingham Palace, discussions intensified. Senior advisors reportedly described her decision as strategically powerful. By declining immediate elevation, she strengthened her influence without formal rank. It was a move that echoed Queen Elizabeth's quiet discipline, never rushing towards status, always centering service. One insider summarized it simply: she chose substance over style. King Charles responded carefully. In a short but meaningful written message, he expressed deep pride in the integrity and clarity shown by Lady Louise. The statement stopped short of pushing the title again, signalling respect for her independence. Prince William was said to be fully aligned, emphasizing privately that the monarchy's future depended on credibility, not ceremony. Meanwhile, the Grey House Trust began taking real shape. Early plans outlined youth fellowships focused on ethical leadership, grants for heritage conservation in rural Scotland, and private archival workshops led by historians. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't designed for viral clips. It was structured, methodical, and mission-driven. Public support only grew stronger. Poll numbers remained high, but something deeper was happening. Louise's image shifted from unexpected heir to steady institutional anchor. Even critics who once dismissed her as too quiet began acknowledging the impact of her restraint. Silence, in this case, had not meant absence, it meant intention. And perhaps the most telling sign came from within the palace itself. The phrase "for service, not spectacle" quietly appeared in briefing notes tied to future outreach initiatives. No formal announcement, no grand reveal, just a subtle adoption of her message into the monarchy's evolving tone. Without demanding the crown, without chasing applause, Lady Louise Windsor had reshaped the conversation. Not through noise, not through rivalry, but through discipline, clarity, and unwavering focus on duty. By mid-February, the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. What began as a private inheritance had evolved into a full cultural shift inside the monarchy. Senior aides reportedly started referring to the moment as the reset. Not because laws changed, not because titles shifted, but because tone did. At Balmoral, King Charles hosted a quiet strategy weekend with Prince William, Princess Catherine, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward. Noticeably absent from key discussions were flashy proposals or grand public rollouts. The focus, stability, trust, long-term credibility. According to insiders, one phrase kept surfacing during those talks: earned authority. And in that category, Louise's name kept coming up. Meanwhile, the Grey House Trust officially opened its first fellowship applications. Within 48 hours, over 12,000 young people across the UK had applied for leadership grants centred on ethical public service. No celebrity endorsements, no red carpet launch. Just a simple announcement and a clear mission. That response sent a powerful signal. People were hungry for substance. Even international observers began weighing in. European commentators described Louise's approach as neo-traditional, blending classic royal restraint with modern transparency. American outlets framed it as a generational pivot away from personality-driven narratives. The message crossing borders was clear. Influence rooted in discipline carries weight. Behind palace doors, one more symbolic change took place. The Royal Communications Office quietly revised internal guidance on public engagements. Greater emphasis would now be placed on community impact metrics rather than media impressions. It was subtle but telling. The monarchy wasn't just defending its image anymore, it was recalibrating it. And what about Louise? She returned to Scotland without dramatic fanfare. Early one morning, locals spotted her walking the hills near the Grey House with a notebook in hand, speaking with conservation staff about land restoration plans. No cameras, no entourage spectacle, just quiet planning in motion. The transformation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In a royal era often defined by headlines and rivalry, Lady Louise Windsor had introduced something different: measured strength. And that steady presence was beginning to feel less like a moment and more like a movement. By March 2026, something unexpected had happened. The drama faded, but Louise's influence didn't. Instead of feeding headlines, she kept building structure. The Grey House Trust announced its first advisory board. Historians, ethics scholars, rural educators, and 2 former military officers known for community leadership. It wasn't flashy, it was deliberate. Every name signalled seriousness. Funding details were released with unusual transparency. A portion of the estate's private revenue would support preservation grants across Scotland, while another share would fund mentorship, programmes for young leaders from underserved communities. Commentators began calling it quiet reform from inside the walls. No protests, no press tours, just steady execution. Then came a subtle but powerful moment at Westminster Abbey. During a Commonwealth service, cameras briefly caught King Charles stepping aside to let Louise walk beside Princess Anne in the procession order. It wasn't announced, it wasn't explained, but royal watchers noticed immediately. Placement in royal ceremonies speaks volumes, and this one spoke clearly. Public opinion polls stabilised at high approval levels for the younger generation of royals. Analysts observed that Louise's refusal of a title had strengthened the monarchy's credibility rather than weakening hierarchy. She had shown that authority could exist without constant promotion. That balance impressed even seasoned constitutional experts. Meanwhile, tensions that once dominated headlines began cooling. Queen Camilla shifted focus back to long-standing literacy initiatives, appearing at smaller regional events with a noticeably softer media strategy. Palace insiders described it as a reset of lanes. The rivalry narrative slowly lost steam as institutional priorities realigned. And then, during a private address to Grey House Fellows, Louise made a remark that quietly defined her path forward. "Legacy is safest," she said, "when it is shared through responsibility, not defended through rivalry." The line wasn't televised, but it circulated fast among attendees and later surfaced in national press coverage. Once again, calm words carried impact. The monarchy hadn't been overthrown, Titles hadn't been dramatically reshuffled, but the centre of gravity had shifted. Influence was no longer measured only by ceremony or rank. It was being measured by trust. Without demanding a crown, without stepping into competition, Lady Louise Windsor had done something in royal history. She made restraint look powerful, and in doing so, she quietly changed the rhythm of the institution itself. By early April, the shift was no longer subtle, it was structural. Palace briefing papers began referencing something new, continuity through character. That phrase wasn't random. It reflected a growing belief inside royal circles that the monarchy's future strength would depend less on hierarchy and more on personal credibility. And once again, Louise's approach was shaping the tone. The Grey House Trust held its first closed-door summit in Edinburgh, bringing together youth fellows, preservation experts, and ethical leadership mentors. No red carpet, no dramatic speeches. Instead, roundtable discussions focused on land stewardship, archival integrity, and long-term cultural education. Observers described the atmosphere as focused and grounded. This wasn't symbolism, it was systems building. Then came another quiet signal from King Charles. During a regional visit to Inverness, he made an unscheduled stop at a community heritage project partially funded by the Trust. Standing beside local volunteers, he remarked, "The strength of our future lies in those who serve without spectacle." The wording echoed Louise's now well-known philosophy. It wasn't an accident. Across the country, a new nickname started appearing in opinion columns, the Steward Generation. Commentators grouped Louise, William, and Catherine into a leadership wave defined by discipline and long-term thinking. The contrast with past turbulence felt intentional. Stability was back in style. Even critics began adjusting their tone. What once looked like an internal power struggle now appeared to be institutional recalibration. Senior constitutional scholars noted that Louise's decision to decline a formal title had actually preserved flexibility within the royal framework. She remained influential, without complicating succession or rank. That balance was rare. Meanwhile, at Hunt, the Grey House, restoration work quietly expanded. Old stone walls were reinforced. Archival rooms were modernised with climate control. Fellows were paired with retired civil servants for mentorship. Piece by piece, the estate transformed from hidden refuge into protected engine of civic education, without ever losing its privacy. And through it all, Louise stayed consistent. No dramatic interviews, no rivalry statements, just measured action. In a monarchy long defined by ceremony, she had introduced a different currency, earned trust. And by April 2026, one thing was clear. This wasn't a phase. It was a foundation being laid in real time. For now, I remain simply Lady Louise. That was her answer. Calm, steady, final. Days later, King Charles sent her a hand-delivered letter, a gesture not seen since Queen Elizabeth II wrote privately to Prince William before his investiture. According to royal sources, it read, "Your grandmother believed that greatness grows in moases." Silence. I now see she was speaking of you. Those words carried history. Louise's written reply reportedly moved the king deeply. She wrote, "I will not seek a throne." Clear, direct. By mid-February, royal watchers agreed that something had shifted inside the monarchy. A new moral axis had formed. On one side stood those drawn to the spotlight. On the other stood Lady Louise, who declined the crown, yet gained the respect of the public. She inherited Queen Elizabeth's private estate. But more than that, she inherited her discipline and her compass. She faced criticism without retaliation. She spoke with humility when praise poured in. She stepped away from vanity, even when it could have elevated her status overnight. That restraint only strengthened her image. By the end of the month, Britain had quietly given her a title of its own, the Guardian of the Grey House. Because in the end, this story was never about land. It was never just about rank. It was about service when no one demanded it, protection when others tried to control it, dignity when silence spoke louder than speeches ever could. Lady Louise Windsor did not inherit a throne. She inherited the meaning of one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into royal legacy and power shifts, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Lady Louise made the right choice? Let's talk about it.